I think the time wasn't quite right. If you look at Matt Taylor and the Dingoes, they're fairly conventional performers. You know, they just stand there and they play their stuff. It's all very nice, and you try and throw a glam rock band into that context, and it's like, whoa, what's the story here? So that's why it didn't work. I don't think we went over quite well enough because there wasn't enough of a build-up for the audience to get used to what we were about to give them. And so, you know, it took a few more times before we were actually successful in that sort of context, you know. But the next time we played Sunbury, they really were hostile. That's when they threw beer cans that were full of beer at the stage. And I saw one flying towards me, coming through the spotlight, you know, swirling around, like spilling beer as it was spiraling towards me. I thought, there's nothing I can do. And it hit me right there. And I missed a beat. But I kept playing. The show must go on.
I think the thing with Sunbury 74 is that we were a glam sort of rock band, full makeup, lyrics, costumes, and we're used to playing at night, and we're on a Sunbury at about midday, and it was stinking hot, and the guitars were out of tune, and it was just kind of not the environment we were kind of used to.
I think we had a lot of input into the way the clips came out, certainly, because we had the costumes, and so that gave you immediately a visual, impact. And we came up with a lot of the ideas as to what we could do in those clips, you know, what sort of actions we would take on. But it was always working with the crews and with the director, and so it was more of a team effort, I suppose. But we certainly had a big impact and input into it, not like maybe some other people that are just totally at the hands of the director and say, what do you want us to do, we did things.
The thing about those clips is that was the early days of clips, and those first clips were done by the ABC. It was essentially the Countdown crew. And so the show, Countdown was going so well and Skyhooks was going so well within that show that they decided to go out and shoot some stuff on location. So that's what those clips were about. And we just turned up, you know, with our frocks on the day, basically. But it was a whole new thing. It was a new medium, and when you look at them, I mean, they look kind of ridiculous, but they were very colourful and they did the job. Well, it wasn't the drugs, I can tell you. It was the part of the brief that I had when I first joined Skyhooks was you had to dress up. You had to change your persona from the street to stage. And there was always actually a bit of a regime where we had to turn up half an hour at least before the gig and prepare for the performance. And so that sort of set that thing in motion. From day one, we were into changing our persona. And as time went on, the individuals took on their different personas, and as time developed, I think we had names from Word Go too, didn't we? I can remember you used to be called Rupert Lantern.
I'm right.
That's right.
His name went out the window, but mine stuck.
Yeah. And the dressing up it was like a bit of a game. If you had a new costume, you wouldn't tell the other guys what it was until the 11th hour, just before you were about to step out there, and you'd step out in this drag in the dressing room, and everyone would crack up laughing, and then you're on stage. So there was a bit of a game going with it as well.
It was good. See how grey he is now? Well, he was always that grey because we used to spray his head with this silver paint every time before he
stuck. See?
That's the reason, yeah.
I had two designers that I worked with, both females, and I would come up with an idea which I would present to them and say, well, how can we make this a reality? So in one instance, there was a costume. I said, I want lights to swirl all around me in pitch darkness. And so this was a bit of a thing. Okay, well, how are we going to do this? And so we got the idea of Christmas lights, but then you need power. So what do you do about that? And so we worked out this a hook-up system with an extension lead coming from the back of the stage. I was running 240 volts in those days. It was pretty dangerous stuff, but hey, what the hell? The show must go on. And going back to the most outrageous costume, that was actually sent to Mushroom Records by a lady who had, would fall in love with the band, saw what I was doing and thought, I could design something for him. Sent this thing in that she'd made. It was the ballerina costume with the bare breasts. And I thought to myself, I couldn't wear this. This is just too bizarre. But, I think the other guy said, you got to wear it. This looks great. And so I was coached into it. But I don't think I actually felt completely comfortable with it. But I thought, hey, this is really good because it's attracting a lot of attention.
I don't think either was more satisfying. I think the whole thing was pretty satisfying. I mean, it was a very heady time. The thing just literally took off, and I think that the banding certainly helped it. It added to the flavour of what the music was about, really. But I think at the time I felt that, and as did everyone else, that the banding was ridiculous. And even I think it was the first record played on Double J, wasn't it? When Double J, which was a government radio station, the first record ever played was "You Just Like Me Because I'm Good in Bed," which is a band record. And things like that were always happening to us, And at that point in time, it was just part of the momentum, and everyone loved it. I mean, we loved the fact the records were selling, and so did the audience. The people who were buying the records loved the fact that it was so popular. It was just one of those hand-in-glove things, wasn't it?
I can't speak for them, but I hope that it gave them they didn't feel that sort of cultural cringe, which was the thing that bothered me when I heard Australian place names used in songs, because it was always they didn't quite have the mystique of Chicago or Texas, and so it was a conscious sort of decision to look in my own environment and come up with place names, for example, that sort of sat with me, but also it was the music that was really, really strong and punchy that sort of underpinned that and made it like we meant business. And so I think it probably opened the way for a few other acts to do similar kind of things, but it was a bit touch and go, I think, because otherwise I was afraid that the songs would end up like I've Been Everywhere Man, and so it's more country sort of things. But I think it was a combination of the music really that helped those lyrics sort of get be taken as seriously as they kind of were in some ways.
That's a good question to ask you, Greg.
I couldn't.
It's been used so many times now.
I couldn't tell you exact date or time, but I think it was written when I was at film school, and it was sort of inspired by a couple of things. Friends of mine who didn't have egos, and the people I was playing with, and there was that contradiction, because I used to get accused of being an egomaniac, and I thought, well, no, you kind of have to have a bit of chutzpah and so on to be actually doing what we're doing, to be and I just my interpretation of ego was sort of self-confidence then, and that's exactly what Skyhooks needed and had, and that's why we were able to do what we did. So I didn't think the way the word was used was a dirty word. I think the straight and gay world was fairly kind of bizarre concept at the time, taking the black sheep,
yeah,
which Bob had and sourced somewhere.
I like the simple ideas, but we had a black sheep on the farm, so we brought that in and shot it, literally.
Well, we took it to the Victorian market, I think, to the
That's
meat
right.
section.
Yes, well, that's pretty outrageous. Yeah, taking a black sheep into a butcher's, I guess.
In terms of competition, I mean, it was from the media perspective, there was always this competition between Sherbet and Skyhooks. But when we were, in doing it, we never sort of really felt that. And in actual fact, we'd meet Sherbet in the dressing room at Countdown and say, hi, how you doing? And I think Shirl and Daryl became, quite good friends. And we'd pass them on the road, or we'd hear stories about how they'd been in town, a month before. And so we never, we weren't really in competition with those bands. Same with like TMG and Hush as well. And
Dragon.
Yeah, and Hush and Sherbet really paved the way, in terms of touring in country areas for us. So there wasn't, any real competition. Although we did play with Sherbet on the same bill, I think, in Adelaide, and I remember sort of feeling a bit duty bound to compete with them because of what had gone on in the media. But I don't think it was any competition at the end of the day.
Red comes from a completely different space. In terms of, I think Bob Spencer was really a guitarist, as against Red, who was just basically this ego with a guitar strapped on the front of him. But the thing about Red is he approached everything in a very calculated mathematical fashion, and he was fantastic for that. So that in terms of constructing a song or working on a tune, he would always work out, he had a beautiful sense of melody that he would mathematically go through the structure of the tune or whatever, and he'd come up with very clever cerebral ideas. As against Bobby Spencer, he was just he just loved guitar. He wasn't, I don't think he was terribly cerebral about the whole thing, but he could play with a world-class sense of melody. I reckon he was seriously had a greater command of that instrument than Jeff Beck. I think he's a very talented musician, that boy. I think it was a bit of for him to join the Skyhooks after Red was something he handled incredibly well. And I think the record that he jumped on board with Guilty Until Proven Insane, and boy, I mean he gave that some huge energy, and that's the essential difference anyway. He was a very powerful guitarist. Red was the thinking man's guitarist, and he came up with clever ideas.
Yeah, because it was at the end of an American tour, and I think, we all kind of wanted to do it and get back home in a sense. And yeah, we were sort of, I guess, displaced in a way, travelling all the time, and then we had to record this album in the last bit of time while we were on holiday visas or something. Because our work visas had run out, and so it was a bit sort of rushed there. And but I still like a lot of the tracks on that. And I think "Is This America" is one of my favourite Skyhook songs. So I think even though it was difficult to make, it was a good record in a lot of ways.
Get in the studio and work on that many tunes and record that many tunes and then go out and actually be able to tour them. There's not many acts that can do that even today. It's very difficult to get sort of a record out once a year or something like that, in this climate. So it was great. The band, as players, I think we all grew through that experience.
I think Shirl was very much a person who could take on a job and just do it to the best of his ability. So if it was selling a song, he would just sell it. Like a good actor in a play would just do whatever was necessary to do the job. So he became a pop star. I mean, I remember the early days when he first joined the band, and he couldn't actually face the audience at all. He sang almost an entire set at one show with his back to the audience, and he was looking at me as I was playing. I was saying, "Sure, the audience is around the other way. Just turn around." And he's sort of, so he's quite shy in the early days.
He brought along a personality that actually opened up, and basically it was the personality that he used on the work site. So he was like a chippy, and he would have been the life of the party on the work site when they're framing up the house. And then as he started working with us, he was kind of thrown in the deep end a bit. But I think he quickly just learnt that he could relate to anyone at all, just being himself. And so when we were playing concerts, I mean, some of us, we'd get really nervous, but Shirl would always just go out and he'd have the whole crowd within 30 seconds. And I think that was a real key to our live performances. And then, of course, when we rapidly sort of rose through the live venues, like over about a year, we started filling joints. Then Countdown came along, and he took on TV, just front on. He was amazing. He would walk into the studio. We'd be all there, like just sort of setting up and getting your positions, but he would know everyone around in behind the scenes in the studio. He'd be talking to people behind the head cans, you know, with names, and so he embraced that very quickly. And I think that the key to us, I can remember when we really hit it. I think it was Horror Movie. It was number one. We were on TV, I think 4 times in a week.
Yeah.
And that just kicked us through. I think Shirl on TV was very powerful, and I think it's that beautiful personality, openness of his, that provided that real power for us just to be accepted Australia-wide. After Countdown, we could fill rooms all around the country.
I'd say with Shirl, in a technical sense, his voice, because it was in the higher register, it always sort of cut through, no matter how lousy the PA was. And so, you know, you knew the people were always
They were lousy.
always hearing the lyrics, which was really good. And, you know, and in those days, you know, the equipment wasn't quite, you know, what it is now. So, but nevertheless, his voice always sort of cut through because of that high and really strong, you know, register that he had.
I think it was that tour. He'd always come up with these great props, and we always had the exploding dick. Well, that one had many manifestations, different shapes and sizes, and of course the one where he was like that flasher, that was pretty good. And on that same tour, we used to have a double bed, and that'd be the roadies would bring on stage, and then he'd invite someone from the audience to come up and sleep with him, right? And of course, he'd promptly get the girl underneath the covers and then sort of start molesting him. Well, we were doing this show down in Lorne, and he's invited up this cop.
A female
he's
cop.
pulled up the female cop, and he's got her on stage in this bed. And believe me, mate, he wasn't messing around. He was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm out of here, mate. Mate, I'm going cruising, I think.
At the end of an argument or heated discussions that we often had, mainly because Red was in the band, but it was like he would have had enough, and he said, "I'm cool. I'm out of here. I got my tools." Right? Remember that?
Yeah,
He figured he could always go back and get a job on the tools. Of course, what he ended up doing
was going back and getting a job on the tours, basically.
he took
Just it was on television
Yeah,
while he was
yeah,
doing
yeah.
it.